Hi everyone, Ryveus here. I'm going to show off how I've configured Steam Input on the Steam Deck to be able to fluidly play an MMORPG called SpiritVale, which has a lot of pointing and clicking and is primarily played with the keyboard and mouse. It doesn't even have native support for controllers, but I've managed to level up this character from level 1 all the way to level 56 base level, 51 job level, using nothing but the Steam Deck. Let's take a look at the control configuration to start off. It looks a little complicated at first glance, but when you're playing it, it's very, very fluid. So we've got typical action RPG type controls for the joysticks. Joystick left is movement and right joystick is for camera. And then we've got some face buttons, which are for basic interactions and dodging. As well as the back buttons here, L4, R4, L5, and R5 being used for the skill sets. This is the bread and butter, along with using button chords in an action layer as well as in the default layer to be able to hit all 18 skill hotbars with just 6 buttons and 6 fingers. So we do that with button chording, and it's a system which I really fell in love with when playing Final Fantasy XIV on the controller. They have what they call a cross hotbar configuration, and it makes using all of those skills very, very accessible with just even fewer buttons than a Steam Deck. But let's get started first with some basics, movement, camera, and menu navigation. As you can see, left joystick, like I mentioned earlier, offers movement. Right joystick is configured to emulate the clicking of the right mouse button and dragging to move the camera left and right, and using the scroll wheels to zoom in and out. In town, we can click on some NPCs using the trackpad to enable the cursor, and then soft pressing the trackpad, and then we can use the mouse to navigate the GUI. Now, one thing that we encountered early on in the test is the frustration of having to click multiple times to move items between menus. Phil, the developer, has added pressing or holding down the shift key to move up to 10 items at a time in a stack. Obviously, there's no shift key on a Steam Deck, but you can bind it. So I have bound that to the up D-pad. If you hold up while pressing the trackpad, you will enable shift, and that moves 20 items at a time. Hold that closer to the camera so you can see there's 20. Click it, and we'll move 10 back out. There you go. Let's exit the menu first. We can either move the mouse button to the top left and click the back button here, or we can hit B, which is bound to escape on the keyboard. Of the other face buttons, B, as I've mentioned, is escape. That opens the settings menu when you're not in another menu. A is dodge roll, but some people don't like lifting their finger from the mouse key or the mouse trackpad bind to hit the dodge button. They want to stay, in the action at all times. So we've also got R1 to dodge, as well as just pressing in the left thumbstick to dodge. X is for interacting. Not much to interact with here in town, so let's go off into Forest Labyrinth. We'll interact with some of the enemies here. In this game, when you interact with an enemy, it opens up their info. So if I move the mouse cursor and then press X, that opens up the interaction menu. But, like I said with the dodge roll, sometimes you don't want to lift your thumb. You're in the heat of battle. You want to interact without moving your control of the mouse cursor away, so you'll also be able to interact with L1. You can also close the interaction menu by pressing B to escape. Start and select are similar. Start is another instance of escape. You can open up the settings menu there. Select will open the inventory. We can also access the inventory and skills menu with left and right on the D-pad. So left opens the inventory, the right opens the skills menu. Down looks a little weird when you press it here in the game because it looks like I'm just moving left. But in this game, if you hold down the D key, which is left on the keyboard, while hovering over an item in your inventory, that will cause it to drop. So if I hover over a card, for example, let's see this pollen card, I want to drop it. I just mouse over and hold down. Mouse over the dog bark card and hold down. Mouse over the bunny card and hold down. So that drops items. If I want to pick them up again, I can either interact with L1 or hit X. And that picks them all up. Y will enable the chat menu. So if I press Y, you can see the cursor turns on in the chat section. And then if you want to type, you can open up the virtual keyboard using Steam's built-in keyboard hotkey, which is the Steam button and X. And you can type using the trackpads. It is not easy. Yeah, that looks right. So we can hit the Y button again, and then confirm by pressing the Y button once more. Now, let's get to the part that everybody is excited for, which is combat. As you can see on the back of the Steam Deck, you've got a grid-like set of rear paddle buttons. Well, they're not really paddles, they're just buttons. But you can see they've got a 2x2 grid. So using that to make it as frictionless as possible, I've decided to bind those to the skill bars in sets of 2x2 skills. If you expand the skill bar from the default one row, you can get a second row of skills, and now you can see if we break it up, like if you ignore the rest of the skills, there, that's a 2x2 grid of skills. There's another 2x2 grid of skills, and another, and another, and then 2 skills on the far right. So using that as a visual guide, so that it eases players into the Chord system as easily as possible, I have set it up so that the grids correspond to the positions of the buttons on the back of the Steam Deck. So if I press, this one would be L4 on my left hand. L4 corresponds to this skill here. If I press R4, that corresponds to Thunderstorm. If I press L5, that corresponds to Heal. And if I press R5, that corresponds to Cure. Now, how am I actually targeting the skills? I'm using the right trackpad as a mouse. So if I want to target this group of monsters here with this AoE skill, I can do that. And just make sure they're extra dead. And then loot them with the X button. Or I can do this again. And if I never want to pick up my thumb off the trackpad, I can loot with the RB button. How about if I want to access the next quadrant of skills? Well, that's where button chording comes in. I never talked about the triggers. The triggers are the secret sauce for the button chording system. If I were to just press these buttons without holding L2 or R2, it activates the skills in this quadrant. If I hold R2, it would shift to this quadrant. If I hold L2, it would shift to this quadrant. If I hold both L2 and R2, it would shift to this quadrant here. And if I just double tap the triggers, it would use these 2 skills at the far right. It's a lot easier to show than explain. So I'm going to try and talk about what I'm doing while I'm doing it. But just know that this feels a lot more fluid than how I am explaining it. All right. I want to target these fire pups with fire skills because I want to fight fire with fire. So I don't want to just press the back buttons without holding my chording key, which is L2. I can just instead hold L2 and use the same back buttons to activate the fire skill. Oh, fighting fire with fire is not so efficient. Let's use ice. So if I want to switch to the ice keys without ever changing what buttons I'm pressing on the back, I can just hold the right trigger and press the same buttons, and now I'm shooting ice at these fire pups. Let's say I want to get a little saucy and show off a little bit and use some basic lightning and earth spells. That's neither accessed by holding L2 or R2, it's accessed by holding both L2 and R2. So now if I press the same buttons on the back without ever changing my muscle memory, I can use the basic fire, and lightning skills. Let's say I want to buff myself and use these 2 skills at the far left, or rather the far right of the skill bar. Well, I'm out of button chords, but the chords themselves can also be set as buttons. So if I double tap L2, I'll get haste. And if I double tap R2, I'll get energy shield. So that should give you an idea of how fluid this gameplay can be. As you can see, I'm switching between skills like nobody's business, and it's just the same buttons that I'm pressing on the back of the Steam Deck, just with different modifiers. You can think of button chords as modifiers, like holding the shift key or holding the control key. It's the same concept, just applied to a different control scheme. And now we can loot all of this stuff. So admittedly, these pups are not too tough, but we can take the same concept and apply it to more difficult areas of the game. I'm going to jump to, let's go to Sanctum of Light, which is an area which is about 20 levels higher than my character level. I'm not going to make any promises and say that you're going to see, elite gaming chops here, but just wanted to showcase how it's very possible for me to hold my own, at least for a little while, in a high-level area. So I'm pulling in, drawing aggro, pulling monsters, using my big skills, using my AoE skills. I would advise you setting your most commonly used skills in... Oh, I just died. There I go, trying to show off. But you could set your most commonly used skills as the on the back buttons without any chording required, so that it's real quick and you don't really have to think about it. And then you can use the button chords to use a little bit more less commonly used skills, but with the same amount of ease and as little friction as possible to overcome muscle memory. I'm getting a little bit of revenge back on the monsters that killed me. And again, this is an area that's about 20 levels higher than me. The mage at this stage of the game development is a little bit OP, so it's not, entirely my control scheme that's carrying me here. But you can see how, even without a mouse and a keyboard, this MMO feels very, very comfortable in the hand. And it runs real... Oh, I got a card there. Cool, nice. It runs real well, too. I don't think it's solid 60 FPS, especially when there's a lot of monsters and effects in the game. In the screen, rather. But it feels good enough. And again, I got to level 57 using nothing but the Steam Deck. So I'm pretty sure with a little tweaking, maybe with some help from the developer in getting some native controls enabled in the game, such as maybe allowing basic controller functions rather than... You can see my mouse cursor pops up, right, when I want to rotate the camera. That's because this was achieved using a bit of a Steam input hacking to get joystick-like controls using mouse input emulation on the joystick, and that works for basic gameplay, but it obviously could use a little bit more help, especially when it comes to navigating menus, which on a controller you would like to navigate as much as possible using the D-pad rather than using a mouse. But that's probably not a priority at this stage of development. Phil probably just wants to worry about making sure that the game doesn't crash. So I would say if you want to play on the Steam Deck, this is purely out of your own willingness to experiment and tinker, and don't expect a fully polished solution, but this is very playable if you manage your expectations. All right, hope this helps. Have fun.